The space race was not in fact a race in space, for those of you who thought it was. It was actually a series of events to see who had more power, the Soviet Union or the United States. Rockets, explosions, satellites, people, monkeys, and even dogs. I mean, just look at her. How could you send her up to space? All contributed to advancements in this so-called race. Let's take a look at what this was all about, shall we? On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union kicks us off with a futuristic-looking ball, Sputnik 1. This was the first satellite in space. Everybody knows about Sputnik. It was even in the Iron Giant. Not shortly after its success, Sputnik 2 was launched, this time with that dog I talked about before. Her name was Laika. However, she was unable to return safely to Earth. Her contributions to the future of space explorations will be remembered. The following year, the US decided to respond with their own satellite, Explorer 1, which launched on January 31st. It discovered the Van Allen radiation belts. Those are, quote, giant donut-shaped swaths of magnetically trapped and highly energetic charged particles, end quote. Just think of a giant rainbow thing that you can't see that goes around the Earth. A couple months later, the US attempts to send up Explorer 2, but it fails to make orbit. Then, on March 17th, after 2 attempts, Vanguard 1, the first satellite to possess solar power, was sent up into orbit designed to test the launch capabilities of a 3-stage launch vehicle. Though communication was lost in 1964, it's still in orbit today. Explorer 3 achieves what Explorer 2 failed: orbit. It collects radiation and micrometeoroid data. Micrometeoroids are microscopic particles in space or of extraterrestrial origin that are small enough so that if they enter the Earth's atmosphere, they will not burn up, but drift to the Earth's surface instead. Pretty neat, huh? Anyway, moving on. On April 27th, Sputnik 3 launched. However, about 90 seconds into the flight, the engine burst into flames and disintegrated, resulting in the rocket falling to the surface. Even though the satellite survived the crash, it was destroyed by a fire started from an electrical short circuit back when the engineers brought it back. Eventually, Sputnik 3 made orbit on May 15th. During all of this year, 6 more Vanguard test vehicles failed. On January 2nd, 1959, the Soviets launched Luna 1. Its target was the moon, but missed by about 4,000 miles. On March 3rd, the US sent Pioneer 4 to do the first American flyby of the moon. On April 9th, the newly formed National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, introduced the first 7 astronauts to the world. Without performing a task, they are instantly hailed and embraced as heroes by the American public. The group consisted of Scott Carpenter, Gordon Cooper, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Wally Schirra, Alan Shepard, and Deke Slayton, and nicknamed Mercury 7. A few months later, we get to see what Earth really looks like from orbit as Explorer 6 takes the first picture of Earth. It looks like absolute garbage, but I mean, hey, it's a start. The next month, the Soviet Union reaches the moon first. It was a waste of materials, but they did get to the moon first by slamming Luna 2 into its surface. Luna 3, however, takes the first picture of the far side of the moon. Does it look like garbage? Yes. Yes, it does. The 60s bring us more space events, but the first is the first successful recovery of film from a satellite in orbit, of which this satellite was Discoverer 14. However, that same month stars 2 stray Russian dogs, Velka and Stilivka. These 2 dogs are the first living creatures to survive the trip to space and back. They are currently dead due to old age, but they are memorialized in the Museum of Cosmonautics in Moscow, Russia. They are so adorable, and I'm glad they survived. I mean, who wouldn't? They're dogs. Look at them. As the Soviets were ready to start looking into sending other things into space, a disaster occurred. On October 23rd, a prototype R-16 missile was installed on the landing pad at the Baikonur test range for testing before launch. A short circuit caused the second stage engine to fire during a test. This detonated the first stage fuel storage right below it, destroying the missile in a massive explosion. This explosion incinerated everyone near the rocket, including 70 people, the USSR's missile guidance designer, and either incinerated or asphyxiated Neldon, head of the R-16 development program. The rest of the people there died of burns or poisoning. The only survivors were missile designer Mikhail Yengel and the test range commanding officer as they left to go smoke a cigarette 100 meters away. But even then, they still suffered from burn injuries. The Soviet Union kept this secret until 1989. Continuing on to the next year, 1961, the Mercury program kicks us off by sending the first primate and chimp, Ham, into space aboard the Mercury 2 rocket at the end of January. This proves we humans can go into space. And with that, the race just got intense. Venera 1 is launched towards Venus, but due to loss of radio contact soon before the flyby in May, no data was able to return to Earth. Then, in April, history is made. The first rocket in the Vostok program sends Yuri Gagarin into orbit, pushing ahead of the US by being the first to send a human in space. Though, re-entry was pretty sketchy. The ball-shaped capsule was designed to eject Gagarin approximately 7 kilometers above the surface. This was a ball-shaped capsule. That already seems sketchy. Anyway, the next month, the US sends Alan Shepard into space and safely brings him back, still aboard the Mercury 3 spacecraft, resulting in the first complete human spaceflight by FAI definitions. Shepard supposedly named his spacecraft Freedom 7, which set a standard for the other 6 Mercury group members. John Kennedy also states the national goal of putting a man on the moon by the end of this decade during the end of this month, May. The next year, on February 20th, Mercury 6 became the first to do a manned orbital spaceflight of more than one orbit, having John Glenn as the pilot. He nicknamed his craft Friendship 7. A couple of months later, on April 26th, Ranger 4, an unmanned spacecraft, crashes into the far side of the moon, of which becomes the first ever to crash into this side of the moon. That same day, Ariel 1, an English satellite, is placed into orbit. This is the first satellite in orbit made by a non-superpower. Later that year, in December, Mariner 2 completes the first planetary flyby of Venus in a US mission. Nothing really happened in the first 5 months of 1963, but in June, Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman in space. She spends almost 3 days in space, orbiting the Earth 48 times aboard Vostok 6. A few days later, Vostok 5 returned 3 days early from its original planned 8-day flight, but still managed to set the record for human spaceflight at 5 days. And yes, Vostok 5 somehow happened after Vostok 6. On October 12th of the next year, Voskhod 1, crew of Vladimir Komarov, Konstantin Feok, Stivtov, Oktistov and Boris Yegorov became the first mission to send multiple people into space at one time on the same spacecraft. That's really it for 1964. Moving into 1965, on March 18th, Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov took the world's first space rock as he floated out of an airlock attached to his Vauxhall 2 spacecraft. The Soviet Union later states that their Vauxhall 2 mission had landed off course, leaving the astronauts stranded in a snowy forest. On March 23rd, astronauts Virgo Gus Grissom and John Young piloted Gemini 3, which was a test for the maneuverability of Gemini spacecrafts. It was considered a success despite the few thrusters issues and the sudden appearance of a contraband corned beef sandwich. Yes, this really happened. They have it on recording. Then, on June 3rd, astronaut Edward White became the first American to walk in space during a Gemini 4 mission. Later spacewalks found it challenging, even though White seemed effortless. Edwin Buzz Aldrin's training in an underwater environment to simulate spacewalking became his standard ever since he did it. A month later, Mariner 4 did the first Mars flyby. Ending off this year, Gemini 7 completed a 14-day human spaceflight record. In the very first month of 1966, Sergei Korolev, the driving force behind the Soviet space program, died of a botched hemorrhoid operation. The next month, Luna 9 completes the first soft landing on another celestial body, otherwise known as the Moon. This is a controlled landing of a spacecraft during which no major damage is caused. The next month, the Soviets crashed Venera 3 into Venus. On March 16th, Neil Armstrong and David Scott boarded the Gemini 8, docking two spacecraft together for the first time. Shortly after this, though, Gemini 8 experienced a struck thruster, and the rest of the mission was aborted. That's some really scary stuff when you're on space. Anyways, the next month, Luna 10 became the first satellite to orbit the Moon. On May 30th, the unmanned American Surveyor 1 lands on the Moon and sends photos and data back to Earth. In November, on the last Gemini flight, Gemini 12, Jim Lovell and Buzz Aldrin dock. Aldrin then makes 3 spacewalks. On January 27, 1967, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were killed in a fire during the launch pad test while in their Apollo 1 capsule. The fire's ignition was not identified, but the disastrous conditions were, that being a sealed cabin pressurized with an oxygen atmosphere. This disaster delayed the Apollo program for over a year. Then, the first space flight fatality occurs, killing Vladimir Komarov on Soyuz 1 when it crashed into the Earth due to a tangled parachute. Hitting us off in 1968, the Soviet Union sent Zond 5 around the Moon and back to Earth in an unmanned test of their spacecraft in September. There were, however, turtles aboard. The next month, Apollo 7, commanded by Wally Schirra, the only astronaut to command Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions, enters Earth orbit in the first test of the spacecraft. That same month, the Soviets launch an unmanned Soyuz 2. A day later, Soyuz 3, piloted by Georgy Berlogovy, launches and completes a rendezvous with Soyuz 2 in orbit. The next month, Zond 6 follows its trajectory around the Moon and returns with a skip entry, bouncing once off of Earth's atmosphere. Then, in December, Apollo 8 completes the first manned orbit around the Moon. Frank Borman commands the mission, with Jim Lovell as navigator and William Anders as a photographer and geological observer. As we stumble into the year 1969, Skip a few months and we revive the biggest event known to man, Apollo 11. Apollo 11 was a mission that put the first humans, Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, and new Lunar Module Pilot Buzz Aldrin on the moon, and the first space launch from another celestial body, in this case the moon. We had completed JFK's goal, but we didn't stop there. Just that fall, Apollo 2 becomes the first precisely targeted pilot landing on the moon, the Surveyor 3 site. Starting our new decade, Apollo 13's oxygen tank exploded on April 14th. Crew Jim Lovell, John Swigert, and Fred Hayes had to use the moon's gravitational force to slingshot the spacecraft back to Earth, of which they succeeded. In December, Venera 7 attempts and completes the first soft landing on another planet, but in this case, it's Venus. Then, on July 31st, Apollo 15 is the first to use a mobile vehicle lunar rover driven by humans on the moon, and even to complete a deep spacewalk on August 5th on their return home. Then, in November, Mars 2, a Soviet craft, impacted into Mars' surface, winning the title of being the first to Mars. Mars 3 completes the first soft Mars landing, and the first signals from Mars are detected in December by Mars 3 as well. On July 15th, the first mission to enter the asteroid belt and leave the inner solar system was completed by Pioneer 10. The next year, on May 25th, Skylab 2 sets a 28-day human-crewed space record, only to be broken by a 56-day record by Skylab 3 on July 28th, which was broken by Skylab 4 at a stunning 84-day human crew space record in November. Then, in December, Pioneer 10 does a flyby of Jupiter. This is the biggest planet in our solar system we're talking about. On February 5th, 1974, the first planetary gravitational assist is completed by Mariner 10. This is basically saying that Mariner 10 used gravity of another planet to change its course. Mariner 10 then does a flyby of Mercury in March. In May, N1 failures caused the USSR to cancel the N1 program. Most of the information on this is still hidden, due to the Soviets keeping their information secret when they were still around. And as we wrap up our very rushed timeline of the space race, on July 17th, the first multinational crew mission, Soyuz 19 Apollo-Soyuz test project, ends our race. We shook hands and realized that space is cool. Who won? Well, many say the US for getting a man on the moon first and being the safest, while others will say the USSR, due to the fact that they had many more firsts than the US, got a man in space first, and got to the moon first, but without being as safe. I mean, what could you expect? They're Soviets. They had little value in life, but they were some of the bravest people you would meet. And with that, my friends, I say goodbye. As I am not doing this again. Holy crap, man.